Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 69th Emerging Growth Conference and day one of our two-day super virtual investor conference. I'm your host, Anna Berry. Just a few notes. Today, we're running until about 5 p.m. Eastern. Now, when we switch to the next company, you might see a black screen for a moment. Don't go anywhere. That's just us moving over to the next presenter. Obviously, if you experience downtime, refresh your browser, and our platform does work best on Google Chrome. So if you're watching from an Apple device, you have to hit the play button to start the session. Now, all of our conferences are uploaded to the Emerging Growth Conference YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe, youtube.com/Emerging Growth Conference. Now, during each company's presentation today, you can submit questions through our webcast module, and we'll attempt to address as many of these as possible at the end of the presentation. Let's begin with Glucotrack Inc. It trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol GCTK. It is a medical device company focused on the design, development, and commercialization of novel technologies for people with diabetes. The company is currently developing a long-term implantable continuous blood glucose monitoring system for people living with type 1 or type 2 diabetes. Happy to welcome Vice President of Sensor Technology for the company. We have Mark Tapsak. Welcome to the conference, Mark.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, Anna. Thank you so much.
Are joining us from all over the world. So let's start with a little background about yourself and the company.
Sure. So I have a PhD in chemistry. I've worked for companies such as Medtronic and Dexcom. Dexcom in particular has employed 12, so many years ago that I've been in the continuous glucose monitoring space. I taught for a number of years, and that actually, interestingly enough, allowed me to go into consulting. And so I expanded from kind of my old friends in industry to a lot of other projects. And that was very rewarding. Well, plus it gave me a great breadth of project experience, right? And understanding kind of all things healthcare. So really my background and my focus throughout my professional career has always been in implantable medical devices, right? And in particular, plastics and polymers that are used in those types of devices. So things like pacemaker lead bodies, glues, adhesives, those sorts of things, even orthopedic implants such as hip and knee joints. Glucotrack itself has been a company around for a number of years. There's a new leadership team, and really we're sort of onboarding all of the activities in the United States. So that's been some of the announcements that we've made within the last couple of years. And thank you for introducing kind of that topic of a long-term implantable glucose sensor. So that's really our current focus and what I'd love to be talking about today.
Yeah, let's dive in. Describe the technology that Glucotrack is developing, Mark.
Sure. So really diabetics have two options to help manage their disease state in looking at their blood glucose levels. The traditional methodology for, 50 plus years has been finger sticks, right? So these are little paper strips, and unfortunately one has to prick their finger, draw a small amount of blood, and go ahead and put that on the paper strip, put that in a glucometer, make that reading. And again, that measurement has been around for a long time. We know it well. Blood happens to be kind of the gold standard, even for comparing all other devices to it through FDA approvals and considerations of precision and accuracy. We always go back to a blood glucose value, actually. Unfortunately, a finger stick is a point-in-time measurement, right? That type of measurement really doesn't give you kind of a predictive power to look into the future a little bit and say, well, gosh, is my glucose going up? Is it going down? And that's important to understand during mealtime, during exercise, right? Again, for kind of the management of the disease state. Not to mention, if you unfortunately have to live with this condition for a number of years, even though an individual finger prick is not necessarily so painful, doing it over time, really ruins those nerves in one's fingertips. And that can be kind of painful over time. The option that people have had for certainly a number of years, and this is a market that's been growing dramatically, with good CAGR numbers for, year over year, in the double digits, have been the percutaneous sensors, right? So what is known in healthcare as continuous glucose monitors, CGMs. Some of the other leadership team and myself, I know Paul Good, my president CEO, has given some presentations such as this, talked about our company a little bit. He and I actually worked at Dexcom many, many years ago, again, closer to the 2000, 2001, 2 kind of time frame. So we've seen this technology grow over time, although we haven't necessarily been working in it full time. The percutaneous sensors, they last a couple of weeks. I'll certainly touch on a little bit more about the nuance of why that is. They're worn on body, so there's a portion that has some electronics and a little battery, and that's literally kind of worn on one's skin. One particular thing, again, we'll touch on it a few times, and that's the time lag as well. So, if I can talk a little bit about biology, when we consume glucose, let's say we drink a Coke or we have a big piece of bread, which is carbohydrates, that goes into our gut, that has to get metabolized, goes into our bloodstream, right? That has to make its way out to the percutaneous tissue close to our skin. And that's actually where those devices are picking up that blood glucose value. So really they're correlated back to blood glucose by way of kind of some biological time lags, right? And there's some challenges with just simply accuracy and precision in those types of devices. Our technology, the continuous blood glucose monitor, is intravascular. So really, we're skipping straight to that gold standard, and we're making measurements within the bloodstream. And there's a number of reasons why that is. Again, throughout this presentation, I'll touch on a lot of aspects of it. But that means there's no on-body wearable. That becomes challenging, frankly, when you have to swim, get into potentially a hot tub, right? If you want to relax a little bit, take on and off a shirt, right? Having anything that's literally attached to your body becomes a little bit of a challenge in that scenario, right? So really, we're looking at fully implantable, leveraging electronics, battery technology, Bluetooth low energy, right? All technologies that, like a lot of, I guess, innovative companies, if you will, or cutting edge technologies, right time, right place, right? A lot of we're really leveraging advances even in consumer electronics and, again, batteries, Bluetooth low energy, that allow us to kind of put together a device that is quite novel in this particular space.
So when you're talking about the implantable, what is the longest sensor life currently on the market? And so how does that work with yours? Talk a little bit more about how this lasts. Sure.
Well, I'll first start again with what devices are on the market, right? So the percutaneous sensors, they're really meant to operate within a fresh wound. And I'll kind of define that term a little bit. We're familiar with these things, right? I literally mean something as simple or small as a paper cut, or you get a thorn in your finger when you're working in your garden on your rose bushes, right? Just something that literally pierces the skin. Even though it might seem quite small, I think everyone's kind of familiar and unfortunately has had that experience, right? It's kind of red and sore for a couple of days. Maybe that redness resolves. Kind of any kind of mechanical wound is kind of resolving over a couple of days, right? As mechanically the body is healing. And then what happens in that kind of 7 to 10, maybe even 14-day time period? Well, the redness goes away, right? The pain is almost completely resolved. You don't really feel it. And frankly, by about 2 weeks, you wouldn't even know where that paper cut was, right? It really is, it's miraculous. And thank goodness that's the case, right? Otherwise, most of us would be dying from things like paper cuts or, little breaches of our skin. So our body's pretty aggressive at protecting us in those kinds of areas. These percutaneous sensors, they take advantage of that, right? In this particular wound space, there is glucose in that interstitial fluid in those tissues, right? So fresh wound created, as small as those little microneedles may be, or as deep or shallow as they might puncture your skin, they're really meant to operate in that kind of space. there's another aspect of kind of a challenge at having that on-body device. And that is, believe it or not, our skin turns over in about a 2-week time period, right? So, when we're washing ourselves or we're scrubbing or, you're doing a nice facial scrub, right, to kind of get rid of that dead skin. Again, believe it or not, it's one of the biggest organs in our body, and it turns over just about every 2 weeks. So really our skin is growing kind of from the bottom up. Dead skin cells exist at the surface. Those slough off or we wash those away, right? So if you're talking about something that literally through an adhesive, right, a skin patch or a Band-Aid is adhered to our skin, well, it's pretty challenging to have that last more than a couple of weeks, right? Because that inherently what you're gluing to is kind of sloughing off in that kind of couple of week time frame. When we look at really kind of patient-centered and what diabetics are telling the market, there's an interesting marketing firm called DQ&A. It's in the Bay Area. It was started by Kelly Close, and they year over year do some really interesting surveys of diabetics and the tools and things that are available to them. In 2018, they ran a study with about 1,300 respondents, and they asked, what were the top 4 things that you wanted, right, out of CGM technologies? And they basically said longer life, shorter warm-up, smaller, thinner, and accuracy. And so we touch on those. Interestingly enough, in 2023, DQ&A did a similar survey, actually with many more respondents, about 3,500 participants. And believe it or not, 5 years later, the same top 4 hit in that order again, right? So longer life, shorter warm-up, smaller, thinner, and better accuracy. So in kind of recognizing, okay, this technology is around, healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, clinicians, they don't really have to understand nowadays what is the value, right, for a diabetic of getting this continuous data stream. But in listening to those patients and kind of recognizing that the market is kind of struggling, right, to address those main points that they're a little bit frustrated with, we really feel that the long-term implantable, right, starts to address those needs by patients. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, this is fascinating. So talk a little bit about 2 years. Are there other medical devices that are implanted for such a long period of time? And how did you determine this 2-year sensor life? How did you achieve
yeah, great. Yeah, thank you for that. That's that's a great question. And so there are devices like cardiac pacemakers. We know that the numbers in the US alone are roughly around 800,000 devices implanted each year. And those are meant to last about 5 to 10 years. I actually remember from my Medtronic days, some of my earliest work there with polymers and plastics were to make the pacemaker lead, last upwards of 20 years, right? And in addition to that, cardiac monitors, which are really just devices kind of like an implantable EKG, right? Someone that might have a heart murmur, an AFib, some condition where the doctor is like, I want to kind of watch you a little bit more closely. I'd love to do an EKG on you, right? And they can do that within the clinic, but I want to send you home with the device because I really want to monitor you for a few weeks. These types of devices are very similar to what we're leveraging for our particular device. And so if you take the 800,000 pacemakers that are put in just about every year and couple that up with about 100,000 roughly cardiac monitors, you're really talking about 1 million devices a year, right? That both go into this space, are similar in size in this space. And the nice thing about that too is, that means there's a lot of doctors out there that are familiar with these types of devices. We're not necessarily inventing, if you will, new implantation techniques, right? New surgical tools. Those are certainly wonderful technologies and great advancements, but really we're looking to kind of leverage as much of that as we can as possible. So for now, actually, I might do this a couple of times, but I'll hold up kind of the size and scale, right, of the device that I'm talking about. So just for size sake, here's a quarter, right? So I'm talking about a device that's maybe the thickness of a couple of coins, about a few coins long. And what we're talking about is this would get implanted kind of in the pectoral space under the skin. And there actually would be a lead. What I'm not showing is the lead portion that goes within the vasculature, right? So that is a small plastic device with a conductor in it, right? And that gets placed within the vasculature. So it's literally in the blood. And this device would kind of be hidden. And it depends on the person's anatomy, right? And their size and shape. And that's the purview of the doctor or the cardiologist, right? That would do this sort of implantation. So yeah, getting back to, other devices that are in this space, we're really trying to leverage the technology. And I mean, literally the materials, the manufacturing techniques that are familiar to vendors in this kind of space, both the surgeons and how we would construct such a device to last that long.
And how did you determine that it's 2 years? Are you confident that you're able to achieve this?
Yeah, that's always a great question too. And it's always a challenging one for a scientist or an engineer to answer, right? So what I'm not doing is running 2-year-long experiments, changing one thing, and then running another 2-year-long experiment, changing one thing, and then running another 2-year-long experiment. That's kind of impractical, really. And frankly, it's impossible. So we leverage mathematical modeling, right? How our device lasts is really tied to the chemistry that we use to converting the glucose molecule into an electronic signal that we can measure, right? So ultimately, again, this device has a little Bluetooth antenna on it, and right through the skin, it's sending out data, right? But it has to capture that data digitally so that it can store it, transmit it. Someone could go ahead and access that data conveniently on their phone or hopefully a watch someday. But this mathematical modeling, think of it this way. I have a highly complex system, and I'm going to use a race car as a quick analogy, right? Race cars are really expensive to build, right? We kind of easily can understand, okay, if I want a race car to go around a quick turn or a corner very quickly, well, I'm not going to build 100 different race cars, right, and test them all out empirically. I'm probably going to do some kind of modeling. So I'm going to look at the center of gravity, the aerodynamics, the width of the tires, right? The front to the rear tires, the way that those front tires will turn, and I'll put some mathematical equations to that, right? And I'll run through some simulations. Now, from those simulations, I'll probably get kind of a prioritized list of what to build, right? And I might make a couple of those modifications to my race car and then test a couple of those aspects, right? The mathematical model might say, well, you should really look at the braking speed, and you should look at the turning radius of the cars and how those front tires are able to move. And then I'd go ahead and test those things. And it's kind of it's a little bit of a dance and an interplay, right, between kind of the empirical evidence and the mathematical models used to extend and kind of predict into the future. So we do that. We run, bench tests that last from days to weeks. And then we run animal models and animal tests, right? So in vivo performance within vasculature, kind of on the weeks to months time scale. And then we take that data, we plug that back into our mathematical models, right? And we kind of look at that prediction. And ultimately, even though I'm not going to draw one or kind of put it up on the screen here because I'm not using slides today, we end up with a graph that says we can accurately measure a sensor signal over time. And on the x-axis is just time in years, right? And so this mathematical model takes all of these kind of complex things into consideration and basically predicts out over time with a certain amount of confidence how long a device like this would last. So that's how ultimately we kind of came up with this initial announcement of 2 years.
And now you recently announced in a press release that the sensor would last even longer than 2 years. So what was that about?
Sure, thank you. So that's just that gets back to this interplay of we're not stopping collecting data, both on the short term and kind of on the medium term, to be able to make these long-term predictions. So even though we, I believe it was last year, we announced initially that we feel the device in its configuration can last 2 years. that really was based on a mathematical model that gave a range, right? And that range, even out of the gates, was kind of that 2 to 3 year time range. So we thought, well, okay, with a certain amount of data, let's be conservative, right? Let's announce that we feel that we can achieve that 2 year time frame. But things like confidence builds over time, right? So with more bench data, with more measurements, with more tightening and refining of the numbers that go into this mathematical model, then we're able to kind of build confidence. And fortunately for us, that confidence was pointing closer and closer to the long end of that originally kind of conceived of time frame. Yeah, so that's how we build that evidence.
Lots of data. Fascinating. Speaking of confidence, talk a little bit about your next steps for the company to increase the certainty and this confidence over the next 3 years or so.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into this. And I've even consulted with a lot of, call it early stage companies, right, that are trying to get into this market. I've done a little bit of, both consulting and some expert witness testimony in this space. And I love it all. I kind of prescribe to this cliche, a rising tide raises all ships. So I think sensing in general, right, giving more people data on their bodies, on their disease state, it's all good, right? It helps all of us that kind of work within this space. I think we heard the term personalized medicine many years ago, and where we really struggled to kind of support that idea of this biological diversity, right? What might be a perfect pill dosage for you is not the perfect pill dosage for me or my mother or others. Whether you're young, old, large, small, etc. Right? So this idea of of personalized medicine, I think one of the reasons that it lags behind is these are really complicated technologies. I'll go back to my car analogy and say, in the average car, there's about 30,000 parts that go into a gas engine style car. That's a lot, and it's a lot to manage. Right now, granted, the engine has thousands of parts, and even the major systems, if you to kind of distill it down to that, you're still talking close to 2,000 parts that go into making a vehicle. So to kind of manage that supply chain, all of those manufacturing steps, right? There's a lot of little things that can kind of shut down the whole process, right? You can't get one fender, well, that means you can't complete the car. And we're in a similar situation, right? So we're managing complex supply chains. Our leadership team at Glucotrack has a lot of experience working in this particular space. Again, with these types of devices, metal can, hermetically sealed, right? No water can get into the electronics, short out the battery, those kinds of things. The mechanical connections between the sensor and the device itself. All these aspects are things that we will continue to work on. Right. And as a small company, we have the ability to move fast, right? Just like a lot of other kind of innovative small companies, we run into a challenge, we quickly make a decision, we move forward, right? And we're running to the edge of the cliff pretty fast. So we also learn fast. I mean, that's the advantage with that, right? Making quick decisions allows us to learn fast. Our initial studies were really performed with devices that we could put together and evaluate the chemistry very rapidly, but they only had batteries, for example, that we knew would only last around 90 days. Well, again, going back to my earliest of comments, I can't run 2-year-long experiments, right, with a device that only has a battery lasting 90 days. So as we continue to feed and even refine kind of our prototype device, right, before we're even at a commercial device, we're making improvements, and that's what it's going to take for us to continue down and build this confidence, right, to understand how long exactly the device will last.
Well, thank you, Mark. Just a few questions from our viewers. I'm going to condense them because we are running out of time. First of all, talk about, do you think patients really want an implantable CGM? What's the desire and the demand for this as an implant?
Yeah, I'll go back again to what diabetics have said, right, in that DQ&A response. No warm-up time. So just, again, very quickly, when you implant that sensor, the percutaneous sensors that are on the market, right? Because of this fresh wound site and because of some electronics that have to break in and almost kind of warm up over time, there's a warm-up period. And that warm-up period can really be on the order of a couple of hours up to 12 hours, let's say. Well, if your device only lasts a few days long, right, 2 to 12 hours is an impactful period for which the person is not getting any data, right? With a device that lasts a couple of years, there's no downtime. You're not unfortunately caught in the case where maybe you're at school and the first, sensor stopped working, so you need to implant that second one, but yet your supplies are at home, right? Or you're at work and it's inconvenient to leave some meetings, right? And to run home and get the supplies. Or, you happen to be on your last sensor, right? In your supplies or in your purse or in your briefcase. And you haven't remembered to order more. So there's little things like that kind of make it challenging for these shorter term devices to really span a long period of time. In a way, it's kind of analogous to the pharmaceutical industry with, say, patient compliance, right? A doctor might say, hey, for this treatment to work well, I want you to take 2 pills a day, right? Well, what happens if you forget for a day, right? Or what happens if your prescription runs out and you're having an issue at the pharmacy and you can't get it filled for a day or two? There becomes these gaps, right, in coverage over time. That's where we really think this long-term device, based on what patients have been saying, that this is really a kind of the right time and place, right, to introduce this kind of a product.
And revisit what the current CGM products, how long they can last. Can any of them get up to 2 years?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for saying that. Because again, I've been mentioning the percutaneous sensors quite a bit. There's a sensor on the market that will last 6 months, and I believe they're running trials at 1 year. In that particular case, they're still within the percutaneous space, this very aggressive space within your skin, right? So that device is still continually attempting to be walled off by the body. That's the challenge they face. Now, they overcome it by being what's called a combination device and eluting a drug right from the device in that immediate area. And that kind of calms down the immune system. There's a little bit of an inherent challenge with that, though, and that is, any motion, if you inadvertently touch the device, move the device, even if motion kind of on a micro scale moves that device in a way that's kind of a re-injury. And so it's really challenging to be within that space and to have truly a long-lasting device. All of these aspects of kind of the immune response that I'm talking about, they're highly mitigated within our vasculature. It's a very different space to be within.
Well, fascinating industry you're in, important as well, like we spoke about. It's all over. Everyone seems to be talking about this. So give us some closing remarks specifically about your company, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to close in saying I think we've got a fantastic leadership team. I can bring some really neat science to the team, but I mean, we have folks that are fantastic engineers, have experience within the space of this kind of device. Again, I think it's the right time, right place. We're going to leverage other technologies that allow us to really bring a kind of a novel technology for diabetics. And unfortunately, we're not limiting the number of diabetics. I think we need to do a good job in the medical device space of serving this patient population.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this good work you're doing. And we enjoyed this presentation. We'd love to have you back with some updates in the future.
Sounds great, Anna. I appreciate the opportunity. Bye-bye.
All right. Be well. All right, everyone, stay with us. We'll be back in just a short while with ASP Isotopes.